You're flipping through the monster manual when you come upon a creature that is perfect for your characters to fight. The only problem is that monster supposedly only exists on a certain plane of reality. Your party is still fairly low leveled and haven't interacted with other planes at this point. Perhaps they don't even know other planes exist in the first place. But you, the game master, know they exist, and you want to toss your party out of the frying pan and into the plane of fire. How do you go about introducing the planes to your players? What sorts of challenges arise when they venture into another reality? How can you have them fight the monster you really want them to without ruining immersion or breaking established lore? Starblade answers these questions and other unrelated tangential ones tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, and with me is Xander. I'll find a way to write myself back into a corner. Nolan.
Hey, man.
For this episode, we're going to focus on traditional planes for our examples, but you can apply what we talk about for any plane. Xander, why even bother with planar travel when you could just bring what you need to the material plane?
Well, beyond it being obvious that a different set piece for your game is something that can shake things up and keep things fresh and interesting, and you can always kind of reach into your bag of pocket adventures and things like that. The planes is where a GM really gets to be creative. When you create your world in your normal plane that the players begin the game in and spend the majority of their time in, you can go a little crazy, but there's certain rules and restrictions and things you kind of have to follow with. But when you
Mm-hmm.
jump into like going from plane to plane, the rules that apply in one place don't apply to another, and it can throw your players off. It can create something that is a problem that even a high level character might have an issue regarding dealing with these particular situations. And the planes are the perfect place to do that. And you're not necessarily even limited to the ones that are in the books and things like that. You could just create your own. So they're really a different way to handle and take care of a small issue, but make it so much more insurmountable than something as simple as, do you have water in your canteen? Guess what? It's not there no more.
So with planes, as Xander mentioned, there are some established like rules and lore with specific planes, especially if you're using the actual D&D setting, one of them at least. The planes have general like rules layouts, which you can actually see in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and kind of tell you how your players will interact with the plane and how the plane interacts back at them. Typically, the plane is presented as it's almost like its own entity. It has its own rules and like fluctuations to it, such as the example that Xander brought up, which is if you bring water into the plane of fire, water don't be there no more. It
Nope.
just evaporates.
Bye bye water.
And that's explained in the actual DMG. You don't have to stick strictly to these rules. You could tweak them a little bit, or a lot of bit if you want, or just make up your own damn planes, or just like start fresh. Say, I want a plane of fire, but then you just make up everything else beyond that. Like, you know the plane of fire exists, but outside of that, nobody's influence other than your own affects what actually shows up in your game.
hmm And then when you sit down at a table with people who are experienced gamers, or maybe even dungeon masters themselves, you've got to remember that they probably know what these planes are. They probably know some of the properties that are associated with them. If you take a little bit of liberty and you alter things, let's say for the plane of water, where any entity that enters there has to have a certain object or artifact in order to do it, and spells don't work because when you're waving your hands around, the water gets in the way of the somatic part of casting the spell. Well, that just fucked up your experienced player a little bit because they weren't expecting that.
Or they pull out something out of their component pouch, and like as they're pulling it out, they realize like, oh shit, this is salt, and the salt just kind of mixes with the water, and
And
then you're like,
dissolves.
damn, there goes my spellcasting component.
Yep, nope. And you got to go back to the store and get some more salt. Another thing to consider when you're dealing with the planes is for the ones that are in the player's handbook, or not the player's handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, there are borders and boundaries between each of those. The main four, which are the plane of fire, the plane of water, the plane of air, and the plane of earth. Those boundary areas you can really fuck with and play around and kind of make things a little bit more interesting, because there's things that are explained in the Dungeon Master's Guide about how to handle it, but how exactly is it that the plane of water interacts with the plane of air? Is there a, forever tall steam wall that's between your players getting from one plane to another? Because they can get into the plane of fire, but they can't get into the plane of water. So
That's right.
there's ways you can mess around with it and kind of tweak.
This applies to other planes as well, including like the Hells. I bring up the Hells specifically because I actually took the base version of it and then tweaked it a little bit for when my players needed to go there. So in the DMG, or maybe it's Mordenkaisen's Tome of Foes, one of those two, it basically says that after a certain amount of time in the Nine Hells, the player will have to make, I think it's a Wisdom save. It might be every hour or so. It's a pretty short amount of time in play. And if they ever fail this roll, then their alignment shifts to evil, straight up. It doesn't matter
Holy
what it
shit.
was before. Yeah, that's right, Xander. So I had to tweak this a little bit in order to have a slightly longer than 1 hour romp in the plane of hell.
Slightly
So
longer.
slightly longer. In fact, several days I needed to extend it by. Uh,
Yeah.
and since Xander Kenton, your character was already in the plane of hell and was going to be there for at least a little bit longer, I wanted to not make it completely unfair to you that you were just going to turn evil.
Yeah.
But you do, I'm sure you recall when you were there, every day that the other players were trying to get to you, I had you roll something because they
Yep.
had special magical amulets on that would prevent them from being affected by this evil. They were given that by basically angels, so that's how it could cancel out the power, being an equal and opposite power.
Yeah. Kenton did not, though.
Right, you didn't have that because you
No.
didn't prepare to go to the hells. They did. You just got took there. So you had to make that roll, which I changed to like every day. And you I think you failed at one time, but the thing that I also edited was it didn't instantly change you from like good to evil. It would switch you from good to neutral, and then a subsequent fail would have changed you to evil. That's
Yeah.
why your alignment changed in like the middle of that entire adventure because you failed that roll. But it wasn't so bad that you couldn't basically play your character anymore.
Yep, I went from I think it was lawful good to lawful neutral, and then over the course of like 7 or 8 game sessions, I went back up to neutral good. I never became lawful again though.
No, you had to work for that too.
Oh
You
yeah.
didn't leave the plane of hell and then your alignment shifted back. No, 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 no.
No,
You
no,
were
no.
lawful neutral for at least 8 game sessions after that, as you were reconciling what you had experienced and how to be a good guy again.
Yeah, and he never really recovered from the thoughts that kind of gathered in his brain while he was down there. He's still questioning a lot of things. Like, is this the good thing to do, or is it just the convenient thing to do? And
That's right. And I
yeah,
would have like even had you gone all the way evil, like you would have ended up lawful evil if you failed again, because like the
yeah,
law or chaos didn't change. It was only whatever the good or evil was. So if you ended up being lawful evil, there was still like it would have been much harder, but there's still a way for you to like I guess recover from that in
yeah,
a very similar way that you boosted yourself back up from neutral to good. Then you would have to have worked way fucking harder, but
oh
it would
yeah,
have still been possible to get back to good. But you would have had a very difficult time trying to reconcile what you want to be with what naturally feels good to you, which
yeah,
what naturally feels good to you is doing the bad thing.
yeah. And a little bit of kind of backstory bit regarding that. The reason why Kenton didn't go back up to lawful good and went straight to neutral good from lawful neutral is because his lawfulness, his kind of code of honor and code of ethics, is what got him into that situation where he changed his alignment in the first place, and he sort of questioned whether or not that was a good idea to continue having that kind of lawful I have a code of honor thing, and he will fall back on his quote unquote old ways of this is probably the best way to do it, but
Well,
uh,
that's why you're neutral and not chaotic.
yeah, and so he went to neutral good instead, so that he could fuck shit up if he needed to, but could also kind of analyze things from a more lawful standpoint. So that's the reason why he altered that much.
And from an out of game mechanical standpoint, for just a second, is Xander actually asked me if he could change the lawful part to neutral. I was already letting him change it back to good, but my assumption was that he would go back to lawful good. He didn't want to do that for character reasons, and I thought it was a great argument. Basically, it's the same thing he just told you guys.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, sure, change it to neutral good.
Yeah, and keep in mind, for fifth edition at least, the alignment system is more roleplay cues.
I
There
mean,
are some
it
places where it's
it
mechanically relevant.
depends. It like depending on what group you go to, like
Yeah,
even back in hell 3.5 or something, then they probably might have the same idea. Just like maybe there's probably groups out there right now playing 5th edition who do immensely care about the alignment system.
yeah.
But we're not here to talk about the alignment system.
We're here to talk about the planes.
We're here to talk about the planes where those alignments come from.
Yeah. So,
So we've talked about barriers in terms of like how to get from one plane to the other. Xander produced a physical barrier that is actually a mishmash of both of those elements combining to form a singular cool set piece that the players need to overcome. What are some other ways we can get players into the planes or between them?
well, one of the first things that everybody thinks of is a portal. A portal is portal is a portal is a portal, and that's how you
Hell
get
yeah,
from
we
place
don't
to
have
place.
portals in real life unless you count the synonym for door a portal, but
Yeah.
we don't have actual glowing magical circles that let us instantly traverse to another location entirely.
Yeah. So there are ways to cast this, to cast a spell, to do plane shift, and there's ways to there's magical artifacts that give you the ability to hop from one plane to another. But independent of those things, especially for a lower level campaign, you really want to add a lot of importance to the shifting from the mortal plane to another plane of reality, let's say the plane of fire or whatever. And the reason why is because if you don't have the players, especially at low level, dealing with some pretty tough challenges and trying to find the right information and trying to get the right materials together to build the thing to make the portal that will take you there, and the portal's unstable and it'll only last a certain amount of time, is because otherwise everybody would just be doing it. It's like, oh, you need to go to the plane of fire? Yeah, take a right onto 6th Street and you'll see the portal. It's tucked into an alleyway. Just walk on through. You'll be fine. Now,
You know, there are games where that could be actually a really cool implementation where instead of having it, or I mean, that I really like your opinion there, but if you have a game where it's like, yeah, maybe these portals just are around and they are known, and maybe somebody can go and just be like, yeah, I really need to. Man, this drought is really hurting my farm. I need to go to the plane of water to really get like fill these tanks up and bring it back to the material plane. You could do that. Like that could be a mundane thing like farmers do in your world. It could be
yeah,
just as cool, but it wouldn't be as important.
yeah. And that, if you really want a good idea on either way, then determine whether or not you're going to have a high fantasy or a low fantasy campaign. But we already covered that
Okay, we did. Last time
last
on
time.
Playing God.
So, one of the main questions that I've been asked, and I think Nick's been asked probably a dozen or more times, is how often should your players encounter these planes? And we're not talking about the as frequently as it needs for the story to be good. No. No, 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 no. That is
Mostly because that
cop out.
answers literally any question you ever have about tabletop game.
Yeah, no. We need to think about it from a logistic and a story beats set. I
I look at
have
this. Oh, go ahead.
I have a general idea that the planes should be implemented whenever the players want to go to a new place or need to go to a new place that has to have drastic, kind of different properties than where they are currently. That could be another nation, it could be another continent, or it could be another plane, or if they need something that can only
So
be
why
found in a
why would
place.
we go to a plane as a change of scenery as opposed to just going across the country and going to another town?
Well, when applying a change of scenery, the idea that okay, you go from a lowlands kind of plains area where everything's just farms as far as the eye can see, and you climb up into the mountains. Sure, it goes from a temperate climate probably to very cold. You'll have to get rock climbing gear, and you'll have to get a lot of really thick clothing so that you can deal with the winter and the coldness of the snow and everything that's on these craggly peaks. But the problem with that is those things exist within your player character's minds already, because there are pictures of actual mountains in our world. And they can theoretically do this IRLZs, especially if they live close enough to a mountain range that has snow-capped peaks.
That's right. Those hill giants really gave me a problem last weekend, but I took care of them.
Yes, but if you want a change of scenery that will give you as a GM the ability to kind of flex your creativity and throw the players way off of their idea of what normalcy is, because most everything that your players are going to think and kind of come to will be something that they can relate to in reality. The plains is where those things go out the window.
Exactly. That, and there's another thing that really will ramp up like the drastic nature of this scene change, and that is the immediacy of being able to go into a plane. So if we're going to this mountain across the continent where we're going to this cool city, the city and the mountain are awesome. We already know that. But that's going to take a while. It's going to take a while in game and probably out of game too. But if you really want to have like a hey, we just need something fucking new right now, then you can have your players need to open a portal to a plane, because then all I have to do is step through the portal, and then now this mountain that was like, it was chilly, it has like snow dusted trees, in the plane of fire, everything is just fucking burning. So
It's all
your players
fire.
went from, oh my god, it's so cold, to we are literally on fire right now.
Oh my god, it is so hot. Oh no, these clothes are burning. Oh, these clothes are burning. um, so there's that drastic kind of change of scenery. There's also player-driven plot. Especially if your players are relatively familiar with the way Dungeons and Dragons works, in a planar sense. You could have plot points and things that can drive them into another plane of existence that your players kind of start up for you. So if you were to have a MacGuffin of some kind that your players have to get in order to defeat the Lich and blah blah blah, because he might have hidden one of his phylacteries in the plane of fire. Who knows?
Well, I mean, I keep bringing up the Plane of Fire because this is a thing you guys did in Legends of Latir.
Yeah,
You
we did.
needed to go to the Plane of Fire because you decided you needed to go to the Plane of Fire. I wasn't going to put it in there yet, but
Yeah.
then you were like, we need to figure this out. We're first going to research to find out first there is a Plane of Fire. Second, how to theoretically get to it. Third, finding people who know how to get there or can get us away there. 4, finding those people. 5, convincing them that this isn't the dumbest idea on the planet. And then 6, getting the required equipment, aka a tuning fork, that they needed in order to open the portal. You have a full adventure right there, and that's just getting to the Plane of Fire.
Yep.
Then once they're in there, then they already have the motivation to go in because they're the ones who put it to you. So
Yep.
when they go in, you have all this cool shit that you have going on the Plane of Fire, and since you could basically drop them anywhere in there and they won't know the difference, then you could drop them in the middle of an encounter. You could drop them in like a good scenic view of the entire area. That's pretty much what I did. It's like I used that as an opportunity to really lay into the description of the Plane of Fire, where they had like magma waterfalls and like basically nothing but soot as clouds in the sky.
Yep.
Like all of those things were there, and even though all that was mostly a description, it got across the point that this place is extremely dangerous, as everybody found out probably that same session.
Yeah, we were all burning the fuck up. I think we brought a barrel full of water to try and keep us hydrated with, and the moment we opened it up, it was just empty.
I felt so bad about that because you're like, this is the Plane of Fire, so there must not be water. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get like this clean, fresh water in this barrel that the barbarian's gonna lug around. Or wait, did you have a barbarian at the time?
We did not have a barbarian at the time. We had a.
Who was lugging that around?
I think it was.
Or did you shove that in your? Did you have a bag of holding by this point?
I think we had the bag of holding at this point. Yeah, we'd had the bag of holding because we'd already been up to the northern portion of
Right. Yeah, you've
Latier.
gone back to Moonlight Harbor after going to the Dwarven Dominance and then back south. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, but either way, I mean, you had the bag of holding, you crammed it in there, and you're like, all right, cool. Now we found a way to get water into the plane of fire. You pop that open, and you just watch steam escape from it as it's like just rapidly and immediately evaporating. You're like,
Oh
no,
shit!
we're thirsty.
We just got here, but we're really thirsty because we're on fire. It was hard. It was really hard.
But that's how you bring the mechanics into the role play and then the challenge aspect of it because you thought the preparations would work, they didn't. So you
No,
have
they
to find
totally
a new
did.
way around the problem.
Yep. And the final reason why planes, I feel, and I think Nick also feels, should be implemented is if you have a game where plane hopping is normalcy. So much like the example that I'd given earlier, where portals and things like that are common, when the common folk use things like that, plane hopping is just, oh yeah, no, you're gonna need to go down to O'Malley's on 3rd Street. There's an amulet you can get that'll help you breathe underwater. Because if you got to go to the plane of water, you're gonna need to breathe, man. It's
That's
pretty
right.
cheap though, like 5 gold.
Or if you wanted to make that an adventure of and of itself, even in like this high fantasy situation, then you maybe you could say, "Hey, we need to go to the plane of air in order to get this amulet." Who knows where a portal to the plane of air is? Because that's you've decided that maybe that one's maybe rarer than the other portals, even though they're still out there. And then they quest over to that location. And it's like, oh yeah, what we got these amulets for? We'll give your whole party each their own individual ones, but we need you to do something for us, or we need you to
Oh
bring
yeah,
something back from the plane of
plane of
water.
water. Or another really good one is have it be a you show up at a random plane, you might get to the one you're wanting, but you might not, and there has to be some preparations that you make to try and get to the one that you're looking for. So there's also that too. Like every portal just might take you to the plane of air when you're trying to get to the plane of water, and then suddenly you're falling.
That's true. Or you can actually expound upon this by if you want your plot to revolve around like semi-random plane hopping. What an item you can eventually have the players earn is perhaps there is some ancient elven wizard who has traveled these planes and has actually drawn a map. Like it's a really convoluted looking thing, and to anybody without like the Arcana skill, they'd be like, "What in the hell am I looking at?" But to anybody with it who knows what the planes are about, they could be like, "Oh, if we take this portal, that'll give us a shortcut over to this plane, so we could actually jump into this portal and go to here where we actually want to be."
That's actually kind of dope. I like that idea too.
Or you could let the players map that.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a good one. Actually, oddly enough, my last D&D game, one of my players decided that they wanted to take proficiency with cartographer's tools, and that's the first time I've ever had a player want to do that. It's like I want to map the shit that we go do. I'm like, yes.
I've never had that happen in any of my games. Every other craft under the sun has been taken at some point. It's like, drawing, like sculpting, entertaining, like music, fucking forging, everything else except cartography.
Yep. Hey, look, I've got a player that wants to do it, so I'm gonna nurture the shit out of that.
Hell yeah,
It's so
you give that
rare.
to him. You lean the fuck into that.
Oh yeah.
So with plane hopping, if normal or not, this is also a really good opportunity for, especially if you can't really make this make sense otherwise, to bring out your big GM guns. This is I'm straight up talking about mechanics here. I'm talking about the monsters that are CR 15 and they would make absolutely no sense showing up in the material plane. But
Yep.
if you bring the characters to the problem, then where the problem already is, that makes sense now. Because if you fight a demon, like a super powerful demon in the Hells, makes sense. If you fight a powerful demon outside the Hells, unless you had a lot of plot backing that up, that probably doesn't make sense.
No, probably not. And it also presents some really interesting ways to implement things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to implement. So, let's say, for example, you wanted to have an air elemental that is causing a ruckus. Well, it's probably not going to be causing a ruckus in the material plane, but say your players are a high enough level adventuring party, they might be called upon by an entity from the plane of air to help them handle this problem because they don't know what to do. And that could be sort of a means by which to draw your players in, but also have them thinking outside of the normalcy of, we get our quest from this dude that lives down the street. It's always a run and grab, or sometimes it's a rescue this person, and now suddenly this creature made almost entirely of air comes asking them for help, and they're like, what?
Or you could take that idea and instead of having you go out to rescue somebody like you like that, the air elemental actually talks to you about recovering. Like maybe there was like some wind lord or something that got condensed into like a singular magical bottle and trapped there. But this
Oh
bottle was
shit.
taken by somebody from the plane of Earth or something. And so the air elementals, they can do basically nothing against the Earth elementals. But PCs can. Player
You guys
characters can
totally
win.
can.
Player characters can go rescue the Wind Lord, bring him back. Maybe you get a cool, unusual magic item as a reward. Something that you find in the DMG that you really like, but you're like, how would this ever exist in my world? Maybe
Yeah,
now's a good time to bring it out.
yeah. Because the planes are where you can have things that wouldn't make sense for your players to have or brought to their material plane, that you could kind of throw those things in. And that's also the opportunity to, if you have a really high fantasy normal setting where your material plane is really high fantasy, you can kind of dip things down into low fantasy where it might be another plane, but maybe their magics are kind of messed with. And maybe magic doesn't quite work in the same ways. So, the normalcy of everybody being able to cast prestidigitation is completely unheard of. So they're walking around the plane of Earth, and they see one of your player characters casting prestidigitation to kind of get some of the dust and soot off of their clothing, and suddenly. Either they're public enemy number one because they're doing forbidden magics, or they're like, you need to come and see the king of all of this place because you could do a thing that we've never seen before. Oh my god!
What?
Yeah, or if you want to shy away from the magic is bad situation, you could have the magic is super good, and as soon as somebody sees this happening, they're like, "You, whatever you're doing, stop what you're doing right now. You need to come with me because this is super important for your magic to be able to handle." Then your players have a choice. Do we go with this random new quest that seemed to come out of nowhere? Or do we keep on what we're doing? What are the consequences for ignoring this? What are the consequences for putting off the main quest? And then you can go from there, like in terms of what makes the cool story.
Hmm. And I think we've already kind of dug a little bit into it, but the planes each present their own independent and unique challenges, and each of these things really challenge your players to think outside of the box of what is normal. It's just so much different in comparison to the mortal plane, and most of the time they're not going to have a metric by which to measure how things operate.
When it comes to challenging these characters, I'm thinking more like the high end level of characters, like high level spectrum characters. Because usually after a certain point, I'm sure every GM's probably noticed this, it's usually like after level 8 or 9, magic becomes the primary solution to most problems in one way or the other. Whereas maybe in the early levels you would have to care about holding a torch and rationing fire and stuff like that. Maybe it doesn't have to matter when you're level 10, and your cleric or your wizard could just be just like, bam, light. There it is. We have light now. Or snap their fingers, prestidigitation. We have a campfire. But if that shit don't work, or if it's if things change so that it doesn't make sense that it would work, like you can't light a fire underwater, then you have to find a new way to provide maybe like some warmth for your party that's freezing in this like deep icy landscape with fucking massive whales and shit swimming around it.
In the air, because, yeah.
Yeah, I mean everything's water is what I'm assuming. Basically, the imagination snapshot I just had in my head was everybody's worst nightmare, where you're like super deep into the ocean and you could see like for very very far distance. But I'm like imagining like like icebergs and shit like drifting around, and then just like all sorts of sea creatures and like water elementals or whatever and shit.
Ah, yuck,
That's the
ick,
that's the emotion that people are probably feeling.
icky. Yeah, and so we've covered a lot of the things for the main planes. There's the hells, there's the heavens, there's earth, wind.
By your powers combined, I am Captain Planet.
Yeah, but you're not limited to those. First,
No, you're
you
not.
can make as many or as few things as you want, but we're gonna assume that you're mostly sticking to some kind of general lore that we usually associate with Dungeons and Dragons. But here's the place where you could just go hog wild and say fuck it to all the rules, and that is when you make a little thing called demi-planes.
Yep.
Which they're called demi-planes because they're not full planes. Like you're not going to. It's never the demi-plane of fire because fire is super important. It is the plane of fire. It's huge. Demi-planes are smaller interdimensional like pocket dimensions basically. This is your shit. Like your bag of holding is technically a demi-plane. When you shove something in there, it isn't disappearing. It's going into its own like individual reality. This is also stuff like Magnificent Mansion and the Rod of Security, I think it's called.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
You take you and 99 other homies to a paradise. Super dope.
Yeah, like even in the rules, demiplanes are written so that whoever makes the demiplane, even if it's only a temporary measure, they get to basically decide what goes on in there. So when a player makes a Magnificent Mansion, they design the mansion.
Yeah.
Like, which is super cool because then the player gets to do something neat and have their own mark in the lore, and you don't have to do anything because you're the GM.
Yeah, and it's really cool in our game in Legends of Latier when our bard Mara creates the Magnificent Mansion, just casts a thing. It's normal for the player characters because we've slept in the thing like every night for like 6 months or so. Like, so we're used to it. We understand, like blah 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 blah. But then other characters who have been traveling with us.
Or like NPCs or
Yeah.
new players who hadn't even seen that the bard can do this in the first place.
Yeah,
They'll
like
go in there.
it's really cool for NPCs to like, oh wait, we're going with you guys? Yeah, totally going. And the dude's like, what? They're going on a suicide mission? It's like, yeah, but see that girl over there? She can cast this thing where this door kind of appears out of nowhere. It's like the best food you've ever had in your life. And it's like a soft bed. It's really warm. It's nice. It's cozy. Trust me, we're going to want this. It's worth dying for. Like, that actually happened. It was great.
That's true. Maybe the less campy, like somebody opens the Magnificent Mansion door and shuts it behind him, and like one of your NPCs or like maybe a new player who's kind of new to the game as a whole is just like, what? They just walked into a closet. Who gives like what? Why are they cramming themselves in there? Then they open the door and like, oh shit, this is what's in here, and they're like, whoa, hold on. And they go in and then they get to take in all that. They get to expand their imaginations. That kind of thing.
Yep.
But you could do whatever with demiplanes. The rules as written ones are generally like customizing things for the players. But here's where you could fuck things up as a GM because you are not limited by the rules as written, and you could say you could make a demiplane do whatever. Typically, the best version of a demiplane, if you're trying to elicit like a weird horror situation, is if you have like fey creatures or sprites or shit like that they have a demiplane, and then you're already thinking the fey's weird, right? So because they already act like odd, but now when you're in their demiplane, suddenly the actual mechanical rules of the game begin to change because you could do that. So if they go into this demiplane and there's a particularly insane like fairy, then maybe this fairy has decided that they don't like longswords but really like rapiers, and the conceptualized actualization of that in terms of the demiplane would mechanically change your game such that longswords now suddenly do, I don't know, arbitrarily 1d3 minus 8 damage. Or, which, yeah, if you don't have a good strength bonus or anything, that would put you in the negatives, which means you do 0 damage. Or maybe you rule it that negative damage heals things in this demiplane.
Or that maybe the negative damage does damage to the wielder instead.
Oh yeah, that's true. You could do whatever.
Because screw you for carrying a long sword.
Yeah, but that person with the rapier, man, I really like that. It's a cool looking weapon, and I really wish I had one. So those do 1d20 plus 2 damage. And you're like,
God,
what?
Jesus Christ.
What?
Suddenly,
See,
everybody wants that rapier.
That's right, because the thing about, especially Faye, but the thing about the demi-planes specifically is that whatever you do is going to be temporary, and whatever you do doesn't have to care about game balance. That's why they are a great example for this, because due to their general natures, they probably wouldn't care about game balance in terms of their plane. So it's like a fireball does 1d4 damage, and it's a level 3 spell, and you're like, oh man, that sucks. And then you're like, I'm gonna cast Magic Missile, but the Fae likes it so much that, oh, the Magic Missile does the normal damage of a fireball now. Or maybe you could have somebody's feet flip on their head, or like instead of, what's the one that you have where you're like super paranoid?
Oh.
Awareness or something?
Yeah, awareness.
Perceptive? I can't remember which one.
Yeah, I think
it
it's
was.
perceptive.
But like maybe if Kenton entered this demi-plane of insanity, then that would have the opposite effect. Suddenly, you're very trusting of everyone, and you get disadvantage on your insight checks. And you're like, but why would they lie to me? This is their universe. They could do whatever they want, man. Let's just go with the flow. And everybody's like, Kenton, are you
Are you
feeling
out of
all right?
your fucking mind? What is
And you're like,
wrong
yeah,
with
man,
you?
I feel great. I never felt better, actually. I actually got some sleep last night.
It was nice. No nightmares. This is awesome. Another thing that you could do is to literally screw with the mechanics of the physics of your world. Not like Nick hates physics, so cold radiates.
No, we're no, not my spiteful anti-physics.
Yeah, no. But like, for example, not given any reason other than it just doesn't work anymore, is there's no gravity. So you gotta bounce around on walls and stuff, and that takes a two-dimensional encounter and potentially makes it, you'll have people fighting on the ceiling while people are fighting on one of the walls off to your right. And in order to get to another encounter, you might have to jump from one side of the room to the other across empty space and then make a reflex save or dexterity check, whatever, to land on the other wall. Like, you could just completely throw things outside of the realm of normalcy.
Yeah, that would be pretty dope.
And it creates an opportunity to do something so much different than anything that any of the other planes may or may not have the ability to do. Like just something as simple as your feet get stuck to the floor, no more, is a really powerful encounter. It's not just like, oh, you're in the plane of water, so obviously there's no air. It's, you're in this plane, there are houses, there are trees, but there's just no gravity. You're kind of floating around. What do?
Or here's a couple ideas. First is in the plane of water, maybe there's some interaction with the plane of air. Maybe like the way you've aligned your universes is that maybe some pockets of air get shoved into the plane of water. Now you have a three-dimensional fight where the players are moving between bubbles of safety through drowning death water and trying to get to other places. I also thought of like the opposite of the example you just gave. I do this kind of shit when I'm doing like the Matrix stuff in Shadowrun, but you
Yeah.
can do it in like fantasy too. I was thinking like, you just thought of that cool anti-grav fight where you're like bouncing between walls. What if we went with the opposite of that? What if in this demi-plane everything becomes two-dimensional?
Oh, no, gross. I love it, but no. Oh God.
Like if you're using like Roll20 or a grid, then at that point it would be like, yeah, the flat image on the screen is what you're perceiving in the actual in-play game, and you're like, I can't perceive that. How do I comprehend that? I don't know.
Good luck. Try getting down that long hallway that goes north. You can just jump from wall to wall.
I mean, that's what were you in that Matrix encounter where I did something like that, where they basically were walking through the Matrix like first person in 3D like you would normally do, and then they changed into a like different host for the mega corporation developer who was like trying to do there was like experiments and other stuff going on that there was a reason behind this. But basically, as you were walking down this hall, the hall kind of contracted and like expanded and did like this really weird undulation, and then you realize that your perspective was actually being like almost like peeled back, and you kind of see yourself as at a top-down angle as everything becomes two-dimensional. I had players roll for Simpsons Vertigo over that.
Yeah, I remember that, and my Simpsons Vertigo fucked me up because we were all using our comlinks.
That's
as
right.
our
You had
decks.
a not super powerful comlink, and you also had some sense vertigo.
Yep, it was really, really, really bad on Slick. It was really bad on him. It
Yeah.
was such a cool encounter, though. It's one of those things where you take the idea of something as simple as changing the perspective to something like 3D to 2D, but when you implement that into a role-playing game and you present that to your players, it will cause motherfucking chaos. The people around your table begin to freak out immediately because something is as simple as, okay, I can see in front of me and to the left of me and to the right of me is suddenly just gone. You only have one line of perception. You're like, no, well, I can't, I don't understand, no.
The trick behind why that works is because when you present something that weird, the actual out-of-game player is trying to comprehend that, but by doing so, in like trying to comprehend something that's incomprehensible, that gives you that feeling. And then that's why they freak out in play, because it's just like, I actually can't get what this is. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's definitely entertaining. It's definitely one of those things that you can play around with when creating demiplanes. You can also make it so that there is a kind of permanent place, not just like, say your bard can cast Magnificent Mansion. All right, that's cool. Magnificent Mansion only exists for a 24-hour span of time. You could, in theory, take that idea and make it a permanent structure that they can return to without the use of spell slots. So they're always carrying around their own little pocket dimension, and it's a home base for them that they can use to travel between places to places because they have doors inside of it. Kind of like how the trees in the forest of The Nightmare Before Christmas, you can go to the different holiday worlds. You can use that kind of idea for a pocket dimension. So there is a million ways that you can utilize these concepts and get kind of creative with it and kind of run with the proverbial shtick, I guess, because
Yeah.
it's no longer limiting.
I have seen some groups. I say try this out because I've never seen them actually succeed in making it like really fun. But some groups try to do the interdimensional Rick and Morty thing, where like every possible reality ever to be conceived exists. The only reason I say that I've never seen somebody successfully do this is because part of the show with Rick and Morty is that because Rick can do that, he feels like a bored god, like he doesn't care anymore, like he's seen everything.
It separates my life as a man from my life as an unfeeling ghost.
Like nothing matters because everything exists, and it will happen anyway. So if you present that to your players, they will probably also have that nihilistic view where it's just like, if we save this dimension, who cares?
Because it won't change anything.
Yeah, like why should we bother? Because it doesn't matter. That's why I try to avoid that. But regardless, jumping between planes gives the players and you a fresh location to mess around with, and little to no consequence to the material world. Planes can spice up the lore of the setting and introduce new ideas and encounters for your party to tackle. And remember, you can always make an entire game that revolves around plane hopping. Be sure to like and subscribe or blab to your friends in Meatspace about us, Starblade. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.